My name wasn't in my husband's will. I looked across the polished table at my son and his wife, and they were celebrating. My name is Ethel. To them, I was just the quiet widow, a relic from the past they needed to manage. What they didn't know, in their moment of triumph, was that my husband had left them one final test. And they had just failed spectacularly. Because the lawyer then cleared his throat and opened a second, secret envelope. Have you ever felt your kindness was mistaken for weakness? I would be honored to hear your story in the comments below. The lake house welcomed us with its familiar tranquility, but the air inside the car was thick with a different kind of silence, a silence of distance. It was the last Friday in June, the year 2024, and the 3-hour drive from the city to our retreat in the Berkshires had been filled with little more than the hum of the tires on asphalt. Logan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, a weariness in his eyes that had nothing to do with the winding roads. Beside him, his wife, Sophia, was absorbed in the blue light of her phone, a tight, artificial smile plastered on her face whenever she caught me looking at her in the rearview mirror. I tried once, somewhere past the halfway point, to break the quiet. "The wildflowers are beautiful this year," I said, pointing to a field of purple and yellow blooms. Sophia glanced up for a fraction of a second. "Lovely," she murmured, before her eyes returned to the screen. Logan just grunted in acknowledgement. I let the silence win after that. I looked out the window at the towering pine trees, their familiar scent a welcome relief as we finally turned onto the long gravel driveway. My Arthur and I had built this place with our own hands, nail by nail, dream by dream. Back in 1998, it was more than a house. It was a testament to a lifetime of love and hard work, a sanctuary I thought would always be filled with warmth. I watched Sophia's eyes scan the rustic wooden porch as we pulled up, not with affection for its handcrafted charm, but with the cold, calculating gaze of an investor. She had always made a point of disliking my things, calling my cherished antiques vintage, with a tone that meant ready for the dump. Before Logan had even turned off the engine, Sophia was out of the car, her heels crunching on the gravel. "Oh, Ethel, darling," she called out, her voice a little too bright, a little too loud in the quiet woods. "Would you mind terribly if I took the master bedroom? I have a few urgent work emails to send, and that gorgeous view of the lake would be so inspiring. The guest room is a little dark for video calls, you know." I managed a tight smile, the words catching in my throat. The master bedroom was my room. It had always been my room. The morning light that spilled through its large windows was the first thing Arthur and I saw when we woke up. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. Logan avoided my eyes, busying himself with unloading the luggage as if he hadn't heard a thing. He was complicit in his silence. Later that evening, the familiar, comforting aroma of roasted chicken filled a kitchen that suddenly felt foreign. I had spent the afternoon cooking, hoping a shared meal, a taste of home, might bridge the distance between us. Sophia, however, picked at her food, pushing a piece of carrot around her plate with her fork. "This old stove must give you so much trouble, Ethel," she said, looking at my faithful Kenmore appliance with an air of pity. "We should really look into getting a modern induction cooktop. It would make things so much easier for you." Her words were framed as concern, but they felt like a judgment on my life, my choices. "The stove works just fine," I said quietly, my appetite vanishing. "But it's about efficiency, darling, and safety," she pressed, glancing at Logan for support. He just shrugged, his focus entirely on his plate, a silent refusal to take my side. Trying to salvage the evening, to find some common ground, I turned to him. "Logan, do you remember when your father taught you how to skip stones from this very dock? You spent a whole afternoon trying to get one to bounce more than 3 times. He looked up, a flicker of something, maybe memory, maybe guilt in his eyes. "Yeah, I remember, Mom," he mumbled, before Sophia quickly interjected, her voice sharp and bright. "Did I tell you about the new gallery that opened downtown? It's absolutely divine. We should all go when we get back," she said, expertly steering the conversation into her world, a world of shiny new things that had no room for old stories or the man who had built this very house. After dinner, we sat on the deck as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the lake in hues of orange and purple. The air grew cool, and the first stars began to appear. It was a perfect, peaceful moment, the kind Arthur and I had cherished. I was lost in the memory when Sophia's voice cut through the quiet, sounding deceptively casual as she swirled the wine in her glass. "You know," she said, gazing out over the property with that same appraising look, "this house must be worth a fortune if it were ever sold, Mom." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. She hadn't said, "if you sold it." She had said, "if it were sold," as if it were an impersonal transaction, an inevitable event. Logan said nothing. The crickets chirped, oblivious to the chill that had just settled over the three of us. That night, I lay in the small guest room, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of a bed that wasn't my own. I couldn't sleep. A cold certainty settled in my heart, heavy as a stone. They hadn't come here for a vacation. They had come to appraise my memories. Sophia's laughter the next morning was shrill, echoing from the back deck as if she were telling a joke, and I was the punchline. I stood in the kitchen, the rich aroma of brewing coffee doing little to soothe the knot of unease in my stomach. Her voice carried through the open screen door, polished and sharp, a stark contrast to the gentle birdsong outside. "You wouldn't believe it, Chloe," she said, her tone dripping with a false, theatrical sympathy. "It's so rustic. The whole place needs a complete overhaul. I'm not sure how she manages it all on her own. It's a bit sad, really." I poured the dark liquid into 3 mugs, my hand steady despite the tremor I felt inside. Sophia's complaints about the house had been the opening shots in a battle I was just beginning to understand. Now she was recruiting allies over the phone, painting me as a feeble old woman in need of rescue. When I stepped onto the deck with the coffee tray, she quickly ended the call, her smile snapping back into place like a rubber band. "Oh, thank you, Ethel. You're an absolute lifesaver." Logan was sitting beside her, staring blankly at the sun-dappled lake, a newspaper untouched on his lap. He looked like a man trapped between 2 worlds, the past I represented, a world of loyalty and quiet contentment, and the shiny, expensive future Sophia was aggressively designing for him. Sophia, however, was a whirlwind of activity. Phone in one hand, she walked around the deck as if she were inspecting a property for purchase. She took pictures, the peeling paint on a window frame, a slightly loose board on the railing, the faint water stain under the gutter above the porch. Each click of her phone's camera felt like an accusation. She wasn't capturing memories. She was documenting flaws, building a case against my home. "Just sending some ideas to our contractor," she said breezily when she caught me watching, not missing a beat. "You know, for our own place. It's so hard to find a property with good bones these days, but the financial side of things is just a nightmare for our generation." She sighed dramatically, a perfectly executed performance of financial woe, a subtle reminder of the troubles she and Logan often alluded to, the very troubles that seemed to fuel their sudden intense interest in my property. Later that morning, she suggested a walk along the shore path. "It's such a beautiful day," she said, linking her arm through mine with a familiarity that felt invasive. Logan trailed behind us, his silence a heavy, tangible presence. The path was narrow, lined with ferns and the familiar, comforting scent of damp earth and pine. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful, like the old days. "Ethel," Sophia began, her voice softening into a tone of practiced concern that set my teeth on edge. "Logan and I have been talking, and we're a little worried about you out here." I kept my eyes on the path ahead, on the familiar roots and stones. Worried. I've been coming here for over 25 years, Sophia. I know this place better than my own reflection. I know, but things are different now. You're alone, she said, squeezing my arm with a grip that was just a little too tight. Have you ever considered one of those lovely retirement communities? Like Lakeside Meadows? They have social activities, prepared meals, a 24-hour nursing staff, complete care. So you wouldn't have to worry about a thing. The phrase, complete care, landed like a stone. She made it sound like a luxury resort, but I knew what it really was, a waiting room for the end of your life, a place where your independence goes to die. I pulled my arm away gently. This is where I feel closest to Arthur, I said, my voice quiet but firm. My memories are here. My peace is here. I don't need a community to take care of me. We walked the rest of the way in a tense quiet. Sophia's manufactured smile was gone, replaced by a thin, hard line. I had rejected her generous offer, and she did not like being told no. Back at the house, as I prepared a simple lunch of sandwiches, Logan finally spoke. He came and stood beside me at the counter, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the window, his gaze fixed on the cutting board. "Mom," he started, his voice low and strained, "Sophia is just worried about you. It can be dangerous being out here alone." His words, meant to be comforting, felt like a deliberate, final betrayal. He had chosen his side. It was the first time Logan had ever called our home, this sanctuary built by his father's hands, here, as if it were just a location on a map, a piece of real estate, and not the very heart of our family. The lake's surface was as smooth as glass, but the reflection of the three of us in the boat was strangely distorted, rippling and breaking apart with every small movement. Logan was rowing with clumsy, uncertain strokes, his shoulders tense. It was nothing like the fluid, effortless rhythm his father had taught him on this very lake, in this very boat, so many summers ago. I sat at the stern, the worn wood cool beneath my hands, and watched the shoreline recede. The familiar shape of our house, nestled among the pines, grew smaller with the distance. Arthur would have pointed out the family of loons near the reeds, or the way the afternoon sun hit the western face of the mountain, turning the rock face to gold. Logan just stared at his hands as they gripped the oars, avoiding the silence that had become our fourth passenger. It was Sunday afternoon, the day before we were scheduled to leave. The weekend had been a long, drawn-out performance of politeness, but the tension was a current running just beneath the surface, strong and cold. My firm refusal to consider a retirement community had been met with a stony silence from Sophia, who now sat at the bow, trailing her perfectly manicured fingers in the water, a picture of bored indifference. "It's a lot of work keeping a place like this up," Logan said finally, his voice strained as he pulled on the oars. The words sounded rehearsed. The property taxes alone must be getting pretty high, and Dad mentioned the roof will need work in a few years. I watched a dragonfly with iridescent wings hover over the water before darting away. "Your father and I always managed," I said simply. "It's part of owning something you love. You don't just discard it because it gets old." My words were meant for the house, but they were also meant for me. "But things are different now, Mom," he pressed, still not looking at me. "I've been looking into a new investment opportunity, something really solid, a tech startup, but it requires some upfront capital. It's a can't-miss chance, the kind that could set us up for life." Before I could process the blatant pivot from his concern for me to his own financial ambitions, Sophia sat up. She'd been waiting for her cue. "What Logan is trying to say, Ethel," she said, her voice sharp with an impatience she no longer bothered to hide, "is that if this house were sold, you would have a huge nest egg for your retirement, and we could borrow a small portion of it for our startup. It would be a win-win for everyone." There it was, not a suggestion, but a business proposal. My home, My memories, the place where I still felt Arthur's presence in every sunbeam and shadow, was reduced to upfront capital and a nest egg. I felt a cold anger solidify in my chest, firm and heavy. I looked from my son's guilt-ridden face, his eyes finally meeting mine with a flicker of shame, to my daughter-in-law's greedy one, which held nothing but ambitious resolve. "As long as I am alive," I said, my voice low but unwavering, each word carefully chosen, "this house will not be sold." The oars stilled. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the side of the boat. Logan looked down as if the answer to his problems was written in the murky depths below. Sophia's face, however, hardened, the mask of civility finally dropping completely to reveal the raw ugliness beneath. "That's so selfish," she snapped, her voice cutting through the peaceful air like a screech. "You're so stuck in the past you can't even think about our future. Do you have any idea how hard we work?" Her accusation hung between us, ugly and raw, selfish. After a lifetime of putting my children first, of sacrificing my own wants and needs for theirs, that was the word she chose. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The foundation of our family had just cracked wide open, and no amount of words could piece it back together. The boat turned back toward the shore in silence. I knew then, with a heavy and certain heart, that the vacation was truly over. The afternoon rain came suddenly, a torrential downpour that lashed against the windows, much like the way Logan placed the legal folder on the coffee table in front of me. It was Tuesday, our last full day at the lake house, though it felt more like a prison sentence. The 2 days since the disastrous boat trip had been thick with a resentful, unspoken truce. We moved around each other like ghosts. The beautiful home now just a collection of rooms we were forced to share. Sophia glided into the living room carrying a tray with 3 cups of tea, her movements unnaturally graceful, a performance for an audience of 1. "Here we are, darling," she cooed, setting a cup before me with a saccharine smile. "A nice cup of chamomile to help you relax. You've seemed so tense lately. You really should be resting, Ethel, not worrying your head about bills and paperwork." Her voice was pure honey, but her eyes were chips of ice. She was laying the groundwork, setting the stage for the next act of their assault. I took the cup, my fingers barely grazing hers, and said nothing. The storm outside raged, mirroring the one brewing within the 4 walls of my living room, the rhythmic drumming of the rain, a somber soundtrack to the unfolding drama. Logan cleared his throat, a nervous, grating sound that betrayed his anxiety. He picked up the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. "Mom," he began, his voice tight with a poorly rehearsed speech he had clearly been coached to deliver. "Sophia and we've been thinking. With the house needing repairs and everything, we thought it would be easier for you if I could help manage things." He opened the folder and pushed a document across the table toward me. At the top, in stark official black letters, were the words, "Durable Power of Attorney." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the words, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes. This was no longer a suggestion or a debate. This was an ambush, a pre-planned legal maneuver. The conversation on the boat hadn't been a spontaneous argument. It had been a calculated test. When I refused, they had moved to phase 2. They had come on this vacation with these papers already prepared. "This would just allow me to handle the payments for any contractors," Logan explained, his gaze fixed on a spot just over my shoulder, unable to look me in the eye. "And deal with the bank or the insurance company on your behalf. It would take all the stress off you so you can just enjoy the house without the headaches." Stress. He spoke of stress as if he were trying to relieve me of a burden, not as if he and his wife were the very source of it. All my trust in him, every last shred I had desperately clung to, evaporated in that moment. I looked from the document to my son's face, searching for the boy I had raised, the child whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and whose fears I had soothed in the dead of night. He was gone. In his place was a stranger, a nervous accomplice to his wife's ruthless scheme. I pushed the papers back across the table, my hand firm and steady. I am still perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Thank you, Logan, I said, my voice dangerously calm, each word a carefully placed stone in the wall I was now building around my heart. The sweet, concerned facade on Sophia's face vanished, replaced by a cold, hard expression. You're making everything so much more complicated than it needs to be, Ethel, she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. I stood up, the teacup rattling in its saucer as I placed it back on the tray. I think this conversation is over, I said, my gaze sweeping over both of them. And I think this vacation is over, too. That night, for the first time in the house that Arthur and I built, I locked my bedroom door. I no longer felt safe. To escape the suffocating atmosphere of their disappointment, I decided to go up to the attic, the one place in this house that held things that wouldn't judge me, my memories. The air downstairs was thick with Logan's resentful silence and Sophia's barely concealed fury. It was Wednesday morning, and the strained politeness of the past few days had completely shattered after my refusal to sign their papers. They were treating me like a difficult old woman, an obstacle to their plans, and the weight of their disapproval was becoming unbearable. The attic was dusty and warm, smelling of old paper and cedar wood, a scent that instantly transported me back to happier times. Sunlight streamed through the single circular window at the far end, illuminating dancing dust motes in its beam. I knelt and opened an old steamer trunk, the brass hinges groaning in protest. Inside were our wedding albums from 1979, stacks of old letters from my mother tied with faded ribbon, and photographs of a young, happy Logan. I traced the outline of his smiling face in a picture from his 10th birthday, a gap where his front tooth should have been. Where had that boy gone? How had he become the man downstairs, whose eyes were now as cold and distant as a stranger's? I spent an hour lost in the past, finding a bittersweet comfort in the life Arthur and I had built together, a life that felt a million miles away from the ugliness unfolding below. Tucked away in a corner, behind a stack of Arthur's old engineering textbooks, was his leather briefcase. He hadn't used it in the last few years of his life, but he could never bring himself to get rid of it. Curiosity, or perhaps some deeper instinct, a desperate need to feel close to him again, made me unlatch its worn brass clasps. The contents were mostly old business papers and blueprints, but one manila folder felt thicker than the rest. I pulled it out. Inside were bank statements from nearly a decade ago, from the spring and summer of the year 2015. I frowned, wondering why he had kept these specific records separate from all the others. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes caught a massive withdrawal, a number so large it made my heart stop: $50,000. It was from our main savings account, the one we had painstakingly built for our retirement. Beneath it was a corresponding wire transfer to an account I didn't recognize. My hands began to tremble. I remembered that year vividly. It was the year Logan had suddenly moved to Las Vegas, claiming he had a great job offer in hospitality. It was also the year Arthur had to sell a small plot of land he had inherited from his father, a piece of property he had loved and had always planned to build a small cabin on. He told me at the time it was to cover an unexpected tax bill, and I had never thought to question him. Tucked between the last two pages of the bank statements was a small sealed envelope with my name, Ethel, written in Arthur's familiar, steady hand. My heart pounded against my ribs as I carefully broke the seal. The note inside was short, but every word landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. "My dearest Ethel," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you have started to see the truth I always feared. I gave Logan a chance, but my heart tells me that greed is a sickness that is hard to cure. I have prepared for the worst, the full truth, and my final wish is with our lawyer, Mr. Davison. If anything should happen to me and you feel unsafe, go to him. Ask him for the Sentinel envelope. It will protect you. I love you. Always, Arthur. I read the letter again, and then a third time, the words blurring through my tears. The attic seemed to sway around me. Arthur had known. He had seen the darkness in our son long before I was willing to, and he had made a plan. He had left me a shield, a weapon, a path forward from a betrayal he had seen coming. I clutched the letter in my hand, the crisp paper, a tangible link to my husband's love and foresight. Arthur had given me a weapon, and now I knew what I had to do. I needed a reason to leave this place immediately, an excuse so solid they couldn't question it. Arthur's letter was a burning secret in my pocket. A call to action from beyond the grave. Every moment I remained under this roof felt dangerous. Every polite, strained smile from Sophia, a veiled threat. The plan formed in my mind as I descended the attic stairs, my steps much lighter and more purposeful than when I had gone up. The attic's dust on my hands felt like war paint. It was Thursday morning, the air still thick with the humidity from the previous day's storm. I waited until I heard Sophia on the deck, her voice loud and performative as she described the lake house's charming potential to a friend on the phone. It was the perfect opportunity. I slipped into the guest bathroom, a small dark room with a single window facing the woods, locked the door, and pulled out my own phone. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed the number of my old friend, Margaret, a woman whose name I had occasionally mentioned to Logan and Sophia over the years. After the second ring, she answered, her voice warm and familiar. I kept my own voice to a frantic, urgent whisper. "Margaret, it's Ethel. I need you to do me a small favor. Just play along with what I'm about to say." I stepped out of the bathroom a few minutes later, my face a mask of practiced distress. "That was Margaret," I announced to the living room, my voice trembling convincingly. Sophia and Logan both looked up from their respective screens. "Her husband, George, had a bad fall this morning. He's in the hospital. I have to go back to the city. She needs me." Sophia looked up from her phone, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows narrowing with suspicion. "Now? But we were supposed to stay until tomorrow morning. Can't her own family help her?" The question was sharp, accusatory. "She has no one else nearby," I lied, the words tasting like ash but necessary for my escape. "Margaret was my maid of honor at my wedding. I can't abandon her now." The mention of my wedding, of a loyalty that stretched back decades, was something not even Sophia could argue with publicly. Logan, who had been slouched on the couch, looked up with something resembling concern, but I knew it was just annoyance at the disruption of their well-laid plans. "Mom, are you sure? We can drive you back first thing tomorrow morning." "No," I said, my tone final, leaving no room for debate. "I'm calling a car service now. I need to be there as soon as possible." Sophia's lips thinned into a hard, resentful line. But she couldn't argue with a medical emergency without revealing her own monstrous nature. The 2 hours it took for the car to arrive were agonizing. Sophia hovered, watching my every move as I packed my small bag, her suspicion a palpable force in the room, making the air crackle with unspoken accusations. Once in the car, speeding away from the lake house, I finally felt like I could breathe again. I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror, a beautiful prison I had just escaped. I didn't call Margaret back to thank her. I knew she would understand. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't dialed in years. Mr. Peterson, our old neighbor from the city. The one who had lived next door to us for 30 years before he retired to Florida. He was a good man, observant and quiet, and he had watched Logan grow up from a boy into whatever he was now. He answered on the third ring, his voice raspy with age, warmed with surprise. "Ethel, is that really you? It's been ages." "Mr. Peterson, I'm so sorry to bother you," I began, getting straight to the point. "But I needed to ask you something about the old days, about Logan." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation that told me he knew exactly what I was asking about. "What about him?" he asked, his tone suddenly cautious. Do you remember anything from when he was in his early 20s, around the year 2015? Did you ever notice anything unusual?" The sigh that came through the phone was heavy with old, unspoken memories. "Ethel," he said slowly, his voice laced with a gentle regret. "I never wanted to be the one to tell you this. I saw some things back then that worried me. Logan was running with a rough crowd. Shady-looking men would come to the house late at night when you and Arthur were out. I heard rumors around the neighborhood that he was in some kind of debt." The words confirmed the dates on the bank statements, slotting another piece of the horrible puzzle into place. A knot of dread and certainty tightened in my stomach. "Did you ever mention any of this to Arthur?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I did," Mr. Peterson said, his voice now full of a deep sadness. "I told him I was worried. And your husband, Arthur, he was a good man. He just told me he would handle it. He said he had to protect his family." He paused, and his next words cemented everything, giving voice to the sacrifice my husband had hidden from me for so long. "Your husband, Arthur, was a good man, Ethel. He sacrificed a lot for that boy." The call ended, but his words hung in the air, a final, heartbreaking confirmation. Stepping into Mr. Davison's law office felt like entering a fortress. The scent of old paper, leather, and polished wood brought a strange, profound sense of security. It was Friday morning, the day after my escape from the lake house, and my heart was no longer fluttering with fear, but beating with a steady, determined rhythm. I had spent the night at a quiet hotel downtown, rereading Arthur's letter until the ink seemed to bleed into my memory. The words were a balm to my wounded spirit and a call to arms. Mr. Davison was a man in his late 60s, with a stern brow that had seen decades of legal battles and eyes that held the quiet wisdom of a man who had witnessed a lifetime of human folly. He had been Arthur's lawyer and closest confidant for 40 years. He greeted me with a solemn, respectful nod and led me into a room lined with leather-bound books, the walls a testament to a long and distinguished career. The room was quiet, insulated from the city's noise, a perfect place for secrets. "Ethel," he said, his voice deep and serious as he gestured for me to sit in one of the high-backed leather chairs facing his immense oak desk. "I received your call. You sounded distressed. Please tell me what has happened." I took a deep breath. The controlled, even sound a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I recounted everything, my voice steady, laying out the facts as clearly as I could. The week at the lake house, the constant insidious pressure to sell, Sophia's thinly veiled insults that were like 1,000 paper cuts, the final ambush with the power of attorney papers, and finally, my discovery in the attic. I laid out the old bank statements on his desk, my finger tracing the damning $50,000 withdrawal from the year 2015. He listened without interruption, his hands steepled before him, his expression unreadable. When I finished, I looked him directly in the eye, my own gaze unwavering. "Arthur left me a letter," I said, my voice clear and strong. "He told me that if I ever felt unsafe, I was to come to you. He told me to ask for the Sentinel envelope." The name hung in the air between us. For the first time, Mr. Davison's professional mask wavered. A flicker of understanding, of profound sadness crossed his face. He stood up without a word, walked to a large steel safe in the corner of the room, and spun the combination lock with practiced hands. He returned with a thick, aged manila envelope, sealed with dark red wax bearing Arthur's personal signet ring, a small, intricate M. He placed it on the desk between us. It felt heavier than its size suggested, weighted with secrets and my husband's incredible foresight. "Arthur gave this to me 5 years ago," Mr. Davison said, his voice now laced with a raw emotion he could not hide. His instructions were explicit. It was only to be opened in a formal will reading in the presence of all named heirs, and only if you, Ethel, specifically requested it by its name. He paused, looking at me with a mixture of immense respect and sorrow. He trusted you would know when the time was right. He hoped that day would never come. He then explained Arthur's plan, a strategy so brilliant and heartbreaking in its design that it took my breath away. Arthur prepared 2 wills, Ethel, the lawyer said, his voice low and conspiratorial, one for the test and one for justice. He explained that the first will, the one he was legally obligated to read first, would be a simple one, leaving the bulk of the estate to Logan, just as my son so arrogantly expected. The Sentinel envelope contained the second, true will, along with a host of supporting documents Arthur had meticulously collected to justify his final decision. It was a test of character, a final posthumous attempt to see if his son had truly changed. So Arthur wanted to give him one last chance, I whispered, tears finally welling in my eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming love for the man I had lost. Yes, Mr. Davison confirmed, his own eyes glistening, a chance to prove he had outgrown his greed, a chance he has, by the sounds of it, spectacularly failed. I left the office an hour later, clutching the official summons for the will reading to be held the following Monday. The game was afoot. Logan's call came that evening, his voice laced with a false, saccharine concern that was almost comical. But underneath the syrupy tone, I could hear a thrum of poorly concealed excitement he couldn't quite contain when he mentioned the will reading. "Mom, I just wanted to see how you're doing," he said, the words rushing out. "Are you okay after, leaving the lake house so suddenly? We were so worried when you left." The memory of their cold fury after I refused to sign the power of attorney hung between us, but he was pretending it never happened. They had interpreted my sudden departure not as a strategic retreat, but as the emotional outburst of a defeated old woman. They believed they had broken me. "I'm fine, Logan," I said, my voice deliberately neutral, offering him nothing to grasp onto. "I'm just resting before the reading on Monday." Good, he said quickly, relief evident in his voice. "About the meeting on Monday, don't worry about anything. Mr. Davison is a professional. It will all be very straightforward." I could almost hear the unspoken words. It will all be ours, soon. Their carelessness, their utter conviction that they had already won, was astounding. They had so thoroughly underestimated me and my husband that they couldn't conceive of any other outcome. A few hours later, a text message from Sophia lit up my phone. The screen glowed with sickeningly sweet words, each one a calculated drop of poison. "Ethel, I've been thinking about you nonstop. I hope you're not too upset with us. We only want what's best for you, and sometimes that means making difficult decisions for the family. After everything is settled on Monday, Logan and I promise we will take very good care of you." I stared at the message, a bitter smile touching my lips. Take care of me. She meant they would manage my small monthly stipend while they lived lavishly on the inheritance they believed was theirs for the taking. They were already planning my future as a dependent, a harmless old relic they could tuck away in a corner while they remodeled my home and liquidated my husband's legacy. My suspicion that they were already spending money they didn't have was confirmed later that night. I was scrolling idly through a social media app, something I rarely did, when a post from Sophia appeared on my screen. It was a picture of a sleek, minimalist kitchen, rendered in 3D, all white marble and gleaming chrome fixtures, a space as cold and sterile as her heart. The caption read, "Dreaming of a fresh start, so excited for our new project." She was already remodeling my home in her mind. She was picking out new appliances with my money, with Arthur's money. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it all didn't even anger me anymore. It simply strengthened my resolve. They were walking blindly and confidently into the trap Arthur had so lovingly and so sorrowfully set for them. Logan called one last time on Sunday evening. The night before the reading, his voice a smooth purr of condescension. "Mom just wanted to check in one last time," he said. "I know this will be a hard day, saying a final goodbye to Dad's affairs, but I want you to know that you don't have to worry about your future anymore. After Monday, all of your burdens will be taken care of." He saw me as a burden, a collection of problems to be managed and dispensed with. The finality in his tone was meant to be reassuring, but it was the final confirmation of his betrayal. I smiled into the receiver, a real, genuine smile that he could not see. "Yes, Logan," I said softly, my voice calm and clear. "I'm sure they will be. All of your burdens will be taken care of. But not mine, my dear son. Yours." The conference room at Mr. Davison's office was cold, despite the heating system humming at full blast. It was Monday morning. I sat at one end of a long, polished mahogany table, my hands folded calmly in my lap, my black dress a stark contrast to the bright, hopeful morning outside. Across from me, Logan and Sophia were practically vibrating with anticipation. Sophia wore a chic dark blue suit, an outfit chosen for a business acquisition, not a somber reading of a will. She kept smoothing the fabric of her expensive jacket, while Logan tapped his fingers impatiently on the table's gleaming surface. They couldn't hide their eagerness to claim their prize. Mr. Davison entered the room, his face an impassive mask that revealed nothing. He carried a single-sealed legal envelope, its crispness a stark symbol of the finality to come. He sat at the head of the table, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, and cleared his throat, the small sound echoing in the silent room. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice formal and devoid of emotion, "to read the last will and testament of Arthur Miller, executed on the date of May 12th, 2021. My gaze drifted to the window, to the gray city skyline beyond. I remembered my last meeting with Mr. Owain Davison, the weight of the Sentinel envelope in his safe, the sad resolve in his eyes. He knew what was about to happen. He was the director of this painful, necessary play, and we were all just actors waiting for our cues. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the document in Mr. Davison's hands, as if it were a winning lottery ticket. Logan held his breath, his feigned solemnity failing to hide the greed glittering in his eyes. Mr. Davison broke the seal with a small, sharp tear that seemed to rip through the tense quiet of the room. He began to read. The legal language was dense, full of clauses and subclauses, but the meaning was simple and brutal. Arthur's will was straightforward. To me, his cherished wife, Ethel Miller, he left a modest monthly allowance, enough to live on comfortably but not much more, along with the contents of our city apartment. The lake house, the investment portfolio, the savings accounts, the bulk of the estate, valued in the millions, was to be left to his beloved and only son, Logan Miller. As Mr. Davison read the final damning lines, a triumphant, almost imperceptible smile played on Sophia's lips. She reached across the table and squeezed Logan's hand. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. The test was complete. They had passed with flying colors, revealing the full, ugly spectrum of their avarice. They exchanged a look, a shared glance of victory that cut me deeper than any insult they had ever hurled. Then, Sophia turned to me, her expression a masterpiece of condescending pity, her voice dripping with the false sympathy she had perfected. "Oh, Ethel," she said, her tone soft and patronizing, "don't you worry about a thing. Logan and I will make sure you're always comfortable. You'll never want for anything." She was already positioning herself as my benevolent caretaker, the generous benefactor of my new, diminished life. Logan stood up, his confidence fully restored, his shoulders thrown back as if he had just conquered a kingdom. He walked to the head of the table and extended his hand to the lawyer, a magnanimous victor. "Thank you, Mr. Davison," he said, his voice booming with a newfound authority that grated on my ears. My father made a wise and prudent decision. As Logan and Sophia gathered their expensive coats and bags, ready to leave and celebrate their victory, their movements crisp with success, Mr. Davison spoke. His voice cut through their smug satisfaction like a shard of ice. "Please sit down," he said, his tone flat, emotionless, and utterly commanding. "There is one more matter to attend to." Mr. Davison placed a dark yellow envelope sealed with red wax onto the mahogany table. Every eye in the room was drawn to it. A relic from the past that suddenly held the entire future in its fragile paper shell. Logan and Sophia, who had been halfway out of their chairs, slowly sat back down, their triumphant expressions collapsing into masks of bewildered confusion. "What is that?" Sophia asked, her voice sharp and brittle. "The reading is over. You said so yourself." "Not quite," Mr. Davison said, his gaze as steady and unyielding as granite. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment, amplifying the tension before continuing. "This is a legal addendum Arthur prepared some years ago. In his letters to me, he called it the Sentinel Envelope. His instructions were explicit. It was only to be opened in a formal will reading, in the presence of all named heirs, and only upon my discretion if certain conditions were met." "What conditions?" Logan demanded, his voice trembling with a new, dawning uncertainty. His bravado was gone, replaced by the flicker of fear I had seen in his eyes as a boy when he was caught in a lie. "The conditions," Mr. Davison replied, his gaze locking onto Logan with the precision of a hawk, of his air demonstrating a profound lack of character and an excess of greed. The color drained from Logan's face. He looked as if he had been physically struck. Sophia stared at him, then at the envelope, speechless. I remained silent, a quiet observer to the justice my husband had so carefully and so sorrowfully orchestrated. Mr. Davison broke the red wax seal with his thumb. The sound, small as it was, seemed to boom through the silent, cold room. He unfolded a new set of documents, their pages crisp and heavy. "This," he announced, his voice clear and final, "is Arthur Miller's true and final will, executed on January 15th, 2023, superseding all previous versions." He began to read. This will was structured very differently. It established a trust fund, the Arthur Miller Family Trust. All assets, the house in the city, the lake house, the entire investment portfolio, the savings accounts, were to be placed into this trust. The sole trustee, with full and indisputable control over its management, was to be me, Ethel Miller. The will stipulated that the principal of the trust was to be left to my grandchildren, Aiden and Mia, to be dispersed in portions only when they reached the age of 25. Logan and Sophia were to receive nothing. Not a single dollar. A choked gasp escaped from Sophia. "This is insane. It's a fake. He would never do that." "I assure you it is notarized and legally binding," Mr. Davison said calmly, not even glancing at her. He then picked up a separate, handwritten letter from the stack. Arthur also left an explanation for his decision, which he instructed me to read. He read my husband's words aloud, his voice filled with a quiet gravity that commanded the room. "To whom it may concern," the letter began. "If this document is being read, it is with my deepest sorrow. I have always loved my son, Logan, so much so that 9 years ago, in the year 2015, when he accumulated a gambling debt in Las Vegas that threatened his entire future, I paid it in full. It was an act of grace that I had hoped would be a turning point for him. This first will was my final test of his character, a final hope that he had become the man I knew he could be. His actions since my passing, however, have given me my answer. I cannot, in good conscience, leave my life's work in the hands of a man who has not yet learned the value of integrity." The room was utterly, deathly silent. I watched as Sophia slowly turned to face her husband, her face a mask of disbelief and gathering fury. Gambling debt? She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that cut through the silence. You never told me about any gambling debt. Logan stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to form a coherent sentence. His face was pale with shock and public humiliation. Sophia shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sound violent and jarring. Her eyes wild with rage, fixed on me as if I were the source of all her problems. Will Sue, you manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against his own son, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. And I knew then, looking at her unhinged fury and my son's broken form, the real war had just begun. My satisfaction did not last long. Just as Sophia had shrieked, the doorbell rang a week later, and a courier handed me a thick envelope from the county court. Her threat had become a reality. I sat in my quiet living room, the official summons in my hand. Logan and Sophia were formally contesting the will, petitioning the probate court on the grounds of undue influence. They were claiming that I, in my husband's final years, had manipulated him into disinheriting his only son. The accusation was as absurd as it was cruel, but the legal weight of the document was real. They were dragging our family's private pain into a public forum, determined to win back the money they felt entitled to, no matter the cost to my reputation. I met with Mr. Davison that afternoon. He reviewed the lawsuit with a grim expression. "This is predictable, Ethel," he said, tapping the document. "It's the standard playbook for greedy heirs. They will try to paint you as a manipulative, frail old woman, and Arthur as a man whose mind was failing." "But that's not true," I said, my voice rising with indignation. "Arthur was sharp as a tack until the very end." "I know that, and you know that," he said calmly, "but a courtroom is a theater, and they are preparing their performance." He then smiled, a rare, thin smile. "However, they have no idea what Arthur left for us in the Sentinel envelope. He anticipated this very move. He explained that the envelope contained far more than just the letter he had read. There were copies of the canceled checks Arthur had written to the Las Vegas casino, and, most damning of all, a handwritten, desperate letter from Logan, begging his father for the bailout and promising to change his ways. "This isn't just a letter from Arthur," Mr. Davison said. "It's a confession from Logan, in his own hand. While we prepared our legal defense, Logan and Sophia began their own campaign in the court of public opinion. The phone calls started a few days later. First, it was from my cousin Martha, her voice dripping with a saccharine concern that felt rehearsed. "Ethel, dear, I just spoke with Sophia. She's so worried about you. She said you've been, well, not quite yourself since Arthur passed, and that your lawyer is taking advantage of you. They were poisoning the well, turning family and friends against me with whispers and lies. They were building a narrative that I was senile, a confused old woman being manipulated. The climax of their smear campaign came on Friday. My phone rang, and it was Arthur's estranged nephew from California, someone we hadn't spoken to in 5 years. "Aunt Ethel," he said, his voice awkward. I just got off the phone with Logan. He told me you've been having some mental health issues, that you're not well." Mental health issues. They had escalated from "not yourself" to a clinical diagnosis in their gossip. The cold fury that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over. They weren't just attacking my inheritance. They were attacking my sanity, my very identity. I hung up the phone and immediately called Mr. Davison. "They want a public fight?" I said, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it felt like ice. "Fine. Let's give them exactly what they want." The probate courtroom was solemn and cold, a perfect stage for the final tragic comedy of my family. I sat beside Mr. Davison, my back straight, my hands resting on the file of evidence we had meticulously prepared. Across the aisle, Logan and Sophia sat with their lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Mr. Albright. Sophia was dressed in a conservative black dress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. Logan stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. They were the very picture of aggrieved children. Mr. Albright began his opening statement, his voice smooth and persuasive. He painted a picture of me as a domineering, controlling woman who, in my husband's final, vulnerable years, had systematically isolated him from his loving son and daughter-in-law. "Your Honor," he said, his voice resonating with false gravity, "we are here today because Ethel Miller, consumed by jealousy and a fear of being left alone, exerted undue influence over her ailing husband, coercing him into signing a vindictive and unnatural final will." He then called his first witness, my distant cousin Carol, a woman I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. She took the stand and, under Mr. Albright's gentle questioning, spoke of how Arthur had seemed more withdrawn in his final years, how I had handled all the finances, and how I rarely let him speak for himself at family gatherings. Every word was a distortion, a twisting of my love and care into something sinister. I hadn't controlled Arthur. I had supported him. But the main performance was Sophia's. She took the stand, her voice trembling, tears glistening in her eyes. She spoke of her deep love for Arthur, how she saw him as a father figure. She described her pain and confusion when, after his death, she discovered that the mother-in-law she had loved and respected had stolen their family's future. "All we ever wanted was to build a life, to honor Arthur's legacy," she sobbed, looking at the judge with wide, innocent eyes. "But she took it all away. She left us with nothing." It was a masterful performance. I could feel the mood in the courtroom shift, feel the silent judgment of the spectators. They were seeing a grieving, devoted daughter-in-law, not the greedy, manipulative woman who had celebrated her inheritance before it was even hers. I was the last person their lawyer called to the stand that day. It was a strategic move, designed to catch me off guard at the end of a long, emotionally draining session. I walked to the witness box, my steps steady, my gaze fixed on the judge. Mr. Albright approached me, his smile predatory. "Mrs. Miller," he began, "you have portrayed yourself as a victim, but let's talk about opportunity. Do you admit that you were with your husband during his final days, that you were his primary caregiver, and that you had every opportunity to influence his decisions?" The question was a trap, designed to make any answer sound damning. I paused, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. I looked straight at him, then let my gaze drift over to Logan, whose eyes were fixed on the floor. "I did not need to influence him," I said, my voice clear and ringing with a truth they could not comprehend. My son's own actions influenced him. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow it will be our turn to speak. When Mr. Davison stood up, holding the Sentinel envelope, I knew the hour of judgment had arrived. The courtroom was hushed, the air thick with anticipation after my testimony the previous day. Sophia looked confident, whispering to her lawyer, while Logan seemed unnerved, unable to meet my gaze. "Your Honor," Mr. Davison began, his voice calm and commanding, "the petitioner, Mr. Logan Miller, has attempted to portray his mother as a manipulative woman who influenced her husband. We are here today to present evidence to the contrary, evidence that my late client, Mr. Arthur Miller, prepared himself should his son's character ever be called into question." He broke the red wax seal of the envelope. The sound, small as it was, seemed to boom through the silent courtroom. He first submitted Arthur's final true will to the court as Exhibit A. Then he pulled out a series of documents. "Your Honor, these are certified copies of canceled checks from Mr. Arthur Miller to a Las Vegas casino dated in the year 2015, he said, placing them on the clerk's desk. "They total an amount that would be significant to any family." A low murmur rippled through the spectators. "And this," Mr. Davison said, holding up a single yellowed sheet of paper, "is the most important piece of evidence. It is a letter, handwritten by Logan Miller himself to his father." He called Logan to the stand. My son walked with heavy steps, his face pale. Sophia stared at him, a confused frown forming on her face. "Mr. Miller," Davison began, "yesterday your wife testified to your impeccable character. Is it true that you have always been financially responsible?" "Yes," Logan mumbled. "Is it true that you have never had to ask your father for a significant financial bailout?" "That's correct," Logan said, his voice stronger now, defiant. Mr. Davison walked toward him, holding the letter. "Then can you please read the first line of this letter to the court, Mr. Miller, and confirm if the signature at the bottom is yours?" He placed the letter in front of Logan. I watched my son's eyes scan the page. The color drained from his face. He looked up, his eyes wide with panic, first at his lawyer, then at Sophia, and finally at me. He was trapped. I can't," he stammered. "Allow me," Mr. Davison said, taking the letter back. He read Logan's desperate, youthful script aloud. "Dad, I've made a terrible mistake. I'm in over my head. The people I owe money to, they're not good people. If you don't help me, I don't know what will happen." The courtroom was stunned into absolute silence. I looked at Sophia. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes fixed on her husband, with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. This was a man she did not know. The judge leaned forward, his expression stern. "Mr. Miller, did you write this letter?" Logan slumped in his chair, a broken man. "Yes," he whispered, the sound barely audible. Mr. Davison delivered the final blow, his voice ringing with the force of truth. "Your Honor, this is not a case of a mother's influence. This is a case of a father's foresight. A father protecting his estate from a son who had already proven himself untrustworthy." The judge stared at Logan for a long, silent moment, then lifted his gavel. "This court will now deliberate and deliver its ruling." The entire room held its breath. The judge's ruling was even harder than the sound of his wooden gavel. He looked down from his bench, his gaze resting on Logan and Sophia with a profound disappointment that was worse than any anger. "This court," he began, his voice filling the room, "finds the petition to contest the will of Arthur Miller to be entirely without merit." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I felt Mr. Davison's hand gently pat my own in a gesture of shared victory. "The evidence presented," the judge continued, "clearly shows that the second will, contained within what has been referred to as the Sentinel envelope, is the true and valid final testament of the deceased. It was a sound and rational decision made by a man of clear mind, seeking to protect his estate and provide for the future of his grandchildren." He then turned his attention fully to my son. "Furthermore, this court finds that this petition was brought forth not out of genuine concern, but out of malice and greed. The attempt to discredit Mrs. Ethel Miller has been baseless and cruel." Sophia let out a small, strangled cry. Logan simply stared at the floor, a man utterly defeated. "Therefore," the judge declared, his voice rising, "the petition is dismissed. The second will is hereby validated." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And due to the frivolous and bad faith nature of this lawsuit, the court orders the petitioners, Logan and Sophia Miller, to bear the full legal costs for both parties." The final sentence was the nail in their financial coffin. I knew from Mr. Davison that the total legal fees would be astronomical, a debt that would haunt them for years. Justice had been served. As the judge concluded the session, the courtroom erupted in whispers. We stood up, and I watched as Sophia turned on Logan in the aisle, her face contorted with rage. "This is all your fault," she hissed, her voice a furious whisper that was audible to everyone nearby. "You lied to me. Gambling debts. You let me walk into this humiliation." Their marriage was crumbling right there in the stark, unforgiving light of the courthouse. Logan looked up then, his eyes finding mine across the room. They were filled with a desperate, pleading agony. "Mom," he mouthed, taking a half step toward me. For a single fleeting moment, I saw the little boy he once was, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the image of the man who had been willing to destroy me for money. I held his gaze for a second, then I turned my back on him and walked away. As I stepped out of the courthouse into the bright, free air, I knew that a chapter of my life had closed forever. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of an apartment overlooking the ocean, a cup of tea in my hands, feeling a sense of true peace for the first time. The salty air was clean, the sound of the waves a gentle, constant rhythm. The bitter chill of the courtroom had been replaced by the warmth of the coastal sun. My long journey from the tense silence of the lake house to the public battlefield of the probate court felt like a lifetime ago. After the trial, I sold both houses, the one in the city where I had raised my son and the lake house Arthur and I had built with our own hands. It was a painful goodbye, but a necessary one. They were filled with too many ghosts, too many tainted memories. With part of the money, I bought this small, bright apartment by the sea. The rest, a significant sum, I used to establish the Arthur Miller Scholarship Fund, a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged students pursue their dreams. It was a legacy my husband would have been proud of, a way to turn the ugliness of greed into something beautiful and lasting. Last week, a letter arrived, forwarded from my old address. The handwriting was Logan's, hesitant and unfamiliar. I opened it with a strange sense of detachment. He and Sophia had divorced. The weight of the legal fees and the public disgrace had shattered what little was left of their marriage. He had lost his job, he wrote, and was now working a menial position, trying to start over. He was sorry. He was sorry for everything. I folded the letter and put it away. The apology had come, as I knew it would, but it was too late. Forgiveness couldn't erase the betrayal, and my peace was no longer his to disturb. Later that afternoon, I walked along the beach, the cool water swirling around my ankles. I thought about Arthur, not with the sharp pain of grief, but with a quiet, profound gratitude. He had loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone. I thought about the son I had lost and the strength I had found in his place. The fight had been brutal, stripping away every illusion I had about my family and my life. But in the wreckage, I had found something I didn't even know I was missing. I looked out at the endless horizon where the blue of the ocean met the blue of the sky. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. Life had taught me a costly lesson, but in return, it had given me back the most precious thing of all, myself. Looking out at the endless horizon from my new home, I no longer think about what was taken from me, but about everything I have reclaimed, my freedom. True justice, I've learned, isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming the dignity they tried to strip away. Setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, but the ultimate act of self-respect. And a real family is built on that respect, not on what can be taken. The only sound now is the peaceful rhythm of the waves, a sound that reminds me I have found a new purpose. Have you ever had to turn a painful experience into your greatest source of strength? I would be honored to hear your story in the comments below.